"Mama," he said, his voice edged with worry, "we barely have enough food left. If we give it all away, what will we eat tonight?" In the bustling city where wealth defined everything, Mr. Djouamena had been a prominent figure. His success, acquired through relentless hard work, allowed him and his family to live a life of comfort and privilege. However, wealth had never been his true joy. His heart belonged to his wife, Pamela, and their two young children, Louis and little Christabel. To the world, he was a formidable man, but within the walls of his home, he was a devoted husband and doting father. Their laughter filled his days, a melody of happiness that anchored him amid life's demands. But life, in its unpredictable cruelty, tore that happiness away. It happened on a rainy evening, the roads slippery and treacherous. His wife and children were returning from a family visit when their car lost control on a sharp bend. The call came in the dead of night. Shaking, he answered, only to hear the words that would shatter his soul forever. His family, his everything, had been taken from him in one violent, unforgiving moment. At the hospital morgue, he saw them one last time. Pamela's serene face seemed to belie the tragedy, as if she was merely asleep, and his children, still in their Sunday clothes, looked as though they would open their eyes and giggle at any moment. But they remained silent, leaving him hollowed and broken. He fell to his knees beside them, feeling an ache so deep he thought his own heart would stop. His voice, choked with grief, barely managed a whisper. Why did you leave me? I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready." With time, the initial shock of the tragedy wore off, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. He tried to return to his life, but nothing seemed to matter. His home, once filled with warmth, now felt like a mausoleum, the memories suffocating him with every passing day. To make matters worse, his extended family, whom he had already distanced himself from, tried to manipulate him. They offered hollow condolences, but their eyes betrayed them, their greed thinly veiled under feigned sympathy. These were the same relatives who had tried to rob him of his wealth when his business began to prosper. They had accused him of forgetting his roots, of abandoning his family, while secretly waiting for an opportunity to sink their claws into his fortune. Now, with no wife or children to inherit his wealth, they saw their chance. But he saw through their ruse, each visit from them a painful reminder of betrayal, masked as love. They wanted his money, his properties, everything he had fought for, and in his broken heart, he resolved one thing. He would not leave his legacy to those who had never valued him, those who waited only to profit from his death. 2 years passed in a blur of loneliness and bitterness. The grief had settled into his bones, making him feel older than he was. Then came the day he felt a strange pain in his stomach, a persistent ache he couldn't ignore. A visit to the doctor confirmed his fears. Cancer. "Mr. Djouamena," the doctor said gently, "I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do. With the best treatment, you might have 5 years. 5 years. 5 years to decide what to do with a lifetime's worth of work." His eyes glazed over, thinking of all he had lost and all he had left. And then, like a spark in the darkness, an idea began to form. He would find someone who truly needed his wealth, someone who would cherish it not for the money, but for the blessings it could bring. Mr. Djouamena made his way toward the eastern region of Ghana, his heart heavy with both sorrow and resolve. He had no map, no destination, and no real plan beyond his mission to find a family worthy of his legacy. He chose a village near Somanya, a humble village known for its resilient people, nestled between hills and rich green fields. Here, he hoped to encounter people who valued kindness over wealth, compassion over material gain. He wanted to find a family that had little but a heart rich enough to embrace a stranger in need. When he arrived that night, he was utterly exhausted. His feet ached from the long journey, and his body felt frail from days of minimal food. Spotting a small container kiosk closed for the night, he saw it as a temporary refuge from the cold air. He leaned against its metal door, his bag tucked close to his chest, and allowed sleep to take over. As dawn broke, he was jolted awake by a freezing splash of water, drenching him from head to toe. Shivering and gasping, he blinked up, his vision blurring as he saw a furious woman glaring down at him, holding an empty bucket. "You mad man! You think my shop is your home?" She spat, her tone dripping with disdain. "I don't know what kind of bad luck you're bringing here, sleeping in front of my shop. Get out before I call the village guards." He scrambled to his feet, shaking with both the cold and the sting of humiliation. "I'm sorry," he murmured, bowing his head in apology. "I meant no harm. I just needed a place to rest." She scoffed, her eyes narrowing as if he were something foul. "People like you don't belong here. You're nothing but trouble." She waved him away, muttering curses under her breath as he stumbled away, still drenched and shivering. As he walked through the village, he felt eyes on him, whispers following his every step. His disheveled appearance, his worn clothes and hollowed expression made him an object of suspicion. Despite his once powerful presence, he now looked like any other destitute soul, an easy target for scorn. The next day, hungry and desperate, Mr. Juamena's steps led him to the bustling village market, where the aroma of cooked beans and gari filled the air. His stomach clenched as he neared a stall run by an older woman known for her delicious bean dishes. He approached her, his face shadowed with humility and hope, though he could feel the weight of judgment in the stares of those around him. "Good morning, Mommy," he greeted quietly, hands clasped as he swallowed his pride. "Please, I haven't eaten in days. Could you give me a small bowl of beans and gari on credit? I promise to return in 2 days to settle the debt." The woman gave him a long, appraising look, her gaze lingering on his tattered clothes and weary face. Her lips pursed, and she let out a dismissive huff. "Credit?" she scoffed, her voice edged with disdain. "Look at you. People like you come here, begging for food, and once you eat, you vanish like dust in the wind. No, I can't give my hard work for free. Please, Mommy," he implored, his voice shaking slightly. "I just need a little to get by. I have nowhere else to turn." But she waved him off, her tone growing colder. "I don't care if you're hungry," she snapped, crossing her arms. "There are plenty of people here who pay for their food, who don't go around begging like this. You look strong enough. Maybe if you weren't so lazy, you'd have earned enough to buy your own food." The words stung. Despite his past success, he was now a stranger, a man with nothing, facing the humiliation of scorn for the first time. He lowered his eyes, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you," before turning away, the pang of rejection settling in his chest. As he walked on, his stomach empty, he could feel the eyes of the villagers on him, whispers following his every step. His disheveled appearance and hollow expression marked him as an outsider, a man who had lost everything, now an easy target for judgment and suspicion. Heart heavy, he wandered through the village, growing weaker with each passing day. But as determined as he was, he refused to give up. He approached another group, this time a few men gathered at a small outdoor seating area, laughing and talking. Summoning his courage, he approached them, hoping for a kinder reception. "Good morning, brothers," he greeted, hands clasped respectfully. I apologize for interrupting, but if you could spare a little food—" One man, a stout figure with an unkind sneer, interrupted him. "Who are you to come here begging like this? What? Did you lose all your money gambling?" The others laughed, and Mr. Wamena felt his cheeks burn with shame. "No, it's not like that," he tried to explain, but the man cut him off. "Or maybe," he added with a dark chuckle, "he's running from the law. Probably stole something back in his village, and now he's here to hide out among us." The accusation hung heavy in the air, and once again Mr. Wamena found himself shunned, dismissed as a beggar, a criminal, or worse. Even the children in the village joined in the mockery, throwing stones and calling him names. "Madman!" they taunted, their innocent voices laced with cruelty. "Thief! Go back to where you came from!" Weak, hungry, and emotionally battered, Mr. Wamena wandered through the village as each rejection weighed down on him, deepening his sorrow. The vibrant colors of the village, the hum of daily life, all blurred into a haze of loneliness and despair. He could hardly remember why he had come here in the first place, his hope fading under the weight of rejection. Days in the village had become increasingly difficult for Mr. Wamena. He wandered from one food kiosk to another, hands outstretched, hoping for a scrap of kindness. Some days the vendors threw him morsels just to get rid of him, their noses wrinkling in disdain at his appearance. His clothes were frayed, his face unshaven, and his once proud bearing now looked like that of a defeated man. The food sellers tolerated him for one reason alone. They feared his dirty appearance would scare off paying customers. One morning, a commotion erupted. A woman, one of the village's well-respected traders, arrived at her store to find the door splintered, merchandise strewn across the floor, and money missing from her cash box. The news spread like wildfire, and the gossiping murmurs quickly turned to suspicion. People began whispering about the stranger, the beggar with no known history, who had come from nowhere and seemed to bring trouble with him. Within hours, a group of young men, their faces hardened with mistrust, found Mr. Wamena huddled under a tree. They circled him, their anger simmering. One boy stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're the only one who has nothing here," he spat. "You're always lurking around the shops begging. It's you, isn't it? You broke into her store." "No, please, I didn't do it," Mr. Wamena protested, but his voice was weak, his gaze pleading. The boys, their anger and prejudice clouding their judgment, dragged him to his feet. Accusations flew, and within moments they decided to take matters into their own hands. The first strike came swiftly, a slap that echoed through the clearing. More hands followed, striking him as he tried to shield his face. The crowd's anger intensified, and their voices rose in a frenzied chorus, their fists flying as they sought to punish this stranger, this outcast. Just as he thought he might not survive the onslaught, a boy named Nate, who had been watching the scene from a distance, dashed through the crowd and ran straight home, shouting for his mother, Dede. Panting and breathless, he explained what was happening. Her heart lurched, and without a second thought, Dede hurried to the scene, pushing through the throng that had gathered. "Stop!" she cried, her voice carrying a fierce authority that momentarily silenced the mob. She rushed to Mr. Wamena's side, shielding his battered body with her own, as the crowd muttered, still simmering with anger. "Killing this man won't solve anything," she said, her voice steady but commanding. "Do any of you have proof he did this? Did any of you see him break into the store?" Silence hung in the air, broken only by the shuffling of feet and the uncomfortable glances the boys exchanged. One of them muttered, "But he's new here. Who else would it be?" Dede raised her hand, silencing them. You think that's enough reason to beat a man to death? If you have suspicions, take him to the palace or the police. Let them investigate. Let them decide. Don't let anger make you murderers." Her words resonated, her calm yet firm tone breaking through the crowd's frenzy. Just then, a runner arrived, shouting news from a neighboring village. "The thieves were caught. They were the ones who broke into the shop," he exclaimed out of breath. At this revelation, guilt crept into the faces of the young men who had been striking Mr. Djouamena. Without another word, they began to disperse, slipping away one by one, ashamed of what they had done. As the crowd thinned, Dadi knelt beside Mr. Djouamena, her eyes filled with sorrow as she took in his bruised, bleeding face. "Come," she said gently, helping him to his feet, her hands supporting his weakened frame. "You'll stay with me. Let's get you cleaned up." With her arm around him, she guided him to her small, humble home, a mud house with a thatched roof that bore the marks of time. Inside, she set him down on a mat and began to prepare a herbal concoction, working with quiet determination as she crushed leaves and roots, creating a paste to dress his wounds. As Dadi carefully dabbed the herbal paste onto Mr. Djouamena's wounds, her touch was gentle, her hands steady yet filled with warmth. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, but her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she asked, "What brought you to our village, stranger?" Mr. Djouamena hesitated, the truth pressing at his lips, but his voice emerged in a careful lie. "I couldn't afford my rent anymore. Life has not been kind to me, and I have nothing left. So I came here, hoping for something, a fresh start, perhaps." Dadi looked at him with sympathetic eyes, her gaze unwavering. She didn't pry further, sensing there was more he hadn't said, but she simply nodded, offering him a reassuring smile. "It takes courage to start over," she said kindly. She handed him a small bowl of stew, a simple meal, but warm and comforting. "Here, eat. This will strengthen you." As he raised the bowl to his lips, savoring the food he hadn't tasted in days, Nati, Dadi's young son, entered the room. His face was tight with concern as he watched Mr. Djouamena eat. "Mama," he said, his voice edged with worry, "we barely have enough food left. If we give it all away, what will we eat tonight?" Dadi shot her son a firm glance, her voice stern but not unkind. "Nate, I've told you before," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "We do not complain about food when we have guests. A visitor must never leave our home with an empty stomach." Nate crossed his arms, clearly frustrated but too respectful to argue further. He looked at his mother, an unspoken accusation in his eyes. "But Mama, this isn't the first time. You always welcome strangers. Feed them with whatever we have, and when they leave, we never see them again. We end up going hungry because of them." Dadi's gaze softened as she placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "My son," she began gently, "you are still too young to understand. Helping others should come from the heart, not from expecting anything in return. Do you know how fortunate we are to have our health? That alone is a blessing many people would give everything to have." She continued, quoting an Akan proverb she knew well. "The umbrella of kings comes in stages or classes. Even in a life of hardship, there are always those who suffer more than we do. We must be the shade for others, even if we ourselves stand in the sun." Turning to Mr. Djouamena, she apologized. "Please don't take my son's words to heart. He is young and doesn't yet understand the strength that kindness brings. Mr. Joamena, deeply moved by her words, placed a hand over his heart and said, "Mame, day. Please, no apologies are necessary. I'm grateful beyond words for your kindness. Truly, I've never known such generosity." From that day on, Day and Nate embraced Mr. Joamena as one of their own. They treated him with care, feeding him and sharing their modest home. Slowly, his broken spirit began to heal, each day a little lighter, his burden of loneliness eased by their kindness. The rhythm of life in the village, simple and unpretentious, offered him a peace he hadn't known in years. Then, one morning, as the first rays of dawn broke over the hills, a knock came at the door. It was a man interested in buying the sacks of maize that Dady had stored from the last harvest. She walked with the man to the yard, discussing prices and quantities, her eyes briefly meeting Nate's, who stood nearby with a look of disappointment. As the buyer left, Nate approached his mother, his voice a mix of confusion and betrayal. "Mama, you promised me we'd use that money to pay for my school fees," he said quietly, his voice trembling with hurt. "Why are you selling it now?" Dady knelt down in front of him, taking his hands in hers, her eyes filled with compassion and understanding. "My son," she said softly, "Mr. Joamena doesn't have enough clothes, and the villagers have been cruel. They call him names, mock me for taking in a mad man." She sighed, her voice thick with sadness. "I cannot let him suffer like that. I'll use the money to buy him proper clothes, so he can walk through the village with dignity." "But, Mama," Nate began, his voice a whisper, conflicted between his own needs and his respect for his mother's decision. "Hush, Nate," she said, holding a finger to his lips. "This is what we must do. You are young, but you will understand one day. True kindness means giving without expecting anything back. I will find another way to pay for your school fees. But remember, never let someone feel they are a burden, for we may be the only family they have." Unbeknownst to them, Mr. Joamena had overheard their conversation from inside the house. As he listened, tears filled his eyes, his heart aching with both sorrow and gratitude. Here was a family that had nothing, yet they were willing to sacrifice even the smallest comforts they had for him. A stranger. The depth of their love and kindness overwhelmed him. He clutched his chest, feeling emotions he hadn't felt in years. "How can people be so selfless?" he whispered to himself, his voice thick with emotion. "This is love I've never known. Love that doesn't ask for anything in return. Love that doesn't measure worth in wealth, but in compassion." In that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. "When the time comes, everything I own, everything I have built, it will be theirs. They may be poor, but they have given me something no amount of wealth could buy: peace, belonging, and the strength to live again." In the days that followed, Mr. Joamena poured himself into helping Day and Nate however he could. He tended the small vegetable garden, repaired the leaking roof, and fetched water from the well, his heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. Each task, no matter how small, felt meaningful, a way to repay them for the love they had so freely given. One evening, as they sat together under the open sky, Dady turned to him, her face illuminated by the glow of the moonlight. "Mr. Joamena, you've been a blessing to us as much as we've been to you," she said softly, sensing the change in him. "The world can be harsh, but sometimes it gives us family in the most unexpected ways. He looked at her, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You are right, Mommy Dede," he replied, his voice choked with gratitude. "You and Nati, you've given me more than I ever thought I'd find again. This village, this life, it's more than I deserve." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the simple beauty of life in the village, he realized that he had found a new family, a family built not on blood or obligation, but on kindness, love, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. After selling the sacks of maize she had stored for months, Dede returned home with a small bundle wrapped carefully in her arms. Her face lit up with a quiet satisfaction as she approached Mr. Djwamena, who was sitting under the shade of the thatched porch, lost in thought. She handed him the bundle, her eyes warm with kindness. "This is for you, Mr. Djwamena," she said softly. "It's not much, but it's something I thought you needed." He looked at her, puzzled, as he carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a neatly folded shirt, a pair of simple trousers, and a pair of new sandals. His hands trembled as he touched the fabric, and a deep emotion swelled within him, almost too much to contain. "Mommy Dede, you didn't have to—" His voice broke, thick with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you." Dede smiled gently, waving off his words. "It's nothing, Djwamena. You're part of our family now. We can't have you walking around in those torn clothes. You deserve to feel like yourself again." Mr. Djwamena's eyes grew misty, and he struggled to hold back his tears. He could hardly believe the depth of this woman's kindness. She had sold her precious maize, the harvest she had worked so hard for, just to buy him these simple clothes and sandals. The weight of her sacrifice settled on him like a blanket, warming him from the inside. "Mommy Dede, I don't deserve this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You've given me so much already." "Nonsense," she replied, her tone firm yet affectionate. "Everyone deserves a fresh start, Mr. Djwamena. You've been through enough. Let these clothes remind you that you're not alone anymore." He nodded, swallowing hard, words failing him. He slipped on the new shirt, feeling the comfort of the clean fabric against his skin, a stark contrast to the ragged clothes he had worn for so long. As he fastened the sandals on his feet, a surge of gratitude flooded his heart. "Thank you," he murmured, looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you for treating me with such kindness, for giving me more than I could ever repay." One cool morning, as the first light began to touch the sky, Dede gently shook Mr. Djwamena awake. Her voice was soft and kind, a familiar comfort to him now. "It's time, Mr. Djwamena," she whispered with a smile. "Today, you'll come with us to the farm. There's work to be done, but we'll make it a day to remember." As they gathered in the small kitchen, Dede prepared a special herbal concoction, a blend of roots and leaves known for its energizing properties, taken by villagers before setting out to work the land. This early morning drink was part of a long-standing tradition, believed to not only strengthen the body, but to bless those who drank it with resilience and good health. She poured the earthy, steaming mixture into 3 small cups, handing one to Nate and one to Mr. Djwamena. Nate took his cup without a word, bringing it to his lips and grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. "It's awful, but you'll get used to it," he whispered to Mr. Djwamena with a mischievous smile. Mr. Djwamena chuckled, his heart warmed by the boy's humor. He took a sip, the bitterness of the herbs startling him, but somehow it tasted right, like the beginning of a journey that was both nourishing and healing. The 3 of them drank together, a quiet moment of unity, a symbolic gesture that he was one of them now. After finishing their drinks, they set out together, the morning air crisp and fresh with the scent of dew-covered earth. The path to the farm wound through fields and small groves of trees, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filling the quiet morning. The day on the farm was filled with hard work, but every moment was painted with laughter and warmth. Day showed Mr. Djwamena how to plant yam, guiding his hands as they dug into the rich, dark soil, their laughter echoing through the fields. Nate ran from row to row, checking each mound of earth, making sure each seed was placed just right, his youthful energy adding a playful rhythm to their work. As the sun reached its highest point, Day called them to a shaded spot under a broad tree where they had spread a simple mat. She unpacked a small pot of soup and some boiled yam wrapped in leaves. They ate together, hands reaching into the same bowl, a true family meal shared without reservation or hesitation. Each bite, though humble, was rich with the flavors of love and sacrifice. They laughed and teased, Nate making funny faces with pieces of yam, and even Mr. Djwamena, once so weighed down by sorrow, found himself smiling until his cheeks ached. After their meal, Day pulled out ears of corn and some small yams she'd packed specifically for roasting. She and Nate built a small fire, and they all gathered around it, feeling the warmth chase away the slight chill of the afternoon breeze. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over their faces, and they took turns roasting corn and yam over the flames. As they toasted the food, Nate began to share stories he had learned from elders in the village. He told tales of great warriors, of ancestors who had lived on this very land, of how each tree and river held secrets from the past. His voice was animated, filled with youthful passion, and both Day and Mr. Djwamena listened with rapt attention, enchanted by his storytelling. When the roasted corn and yam were ready, they ate slowly, savoring each bite, laughing as they blew on the hot food to cool it. Day smiled as she watched her son and Mr. Djwamena share a bond that had grown so naturally. "This is what life is," she said softly, as if speaking to herself. "Simple joys, shared moments, food cooked over a fire. We may not have riches, but we have each other. That's all we need." Mr. Djwamena felt a pang in his heart, realizing how much he had missed these moments in his former life. For years he had been surrounded by luxury, but had been deprived of these small, priceless moments of human connection. He looked at Dady and Nati, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "You've given me more than I could ever repay," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "In all my years, I never knew what family really meant until now." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the fields, they stayed by the fire, huddling close as the evening chill began to settle. Day leaned back against the tree, a contented smile on her face, and Nati lay beside her, his head on her lap, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the closeness of their bond. In the quiet village that had become his sanctuary, Mr. Djwamena found something he had never expected: love. As days turned into months, he grew closer to Day, whose kindness and resilience seemed boundless. Her gentle laughter, her way of caring for him and Nate, and the sacrifices she made for others, touched a place in his heart he thought had long been buried. Yet he held back, the weight of his own secret lingering heavily within him. He knew he didn't have long, only a handful of years, according to the doctors. The thought of binding her heart to his, only to break it when his time came, was something he couldn't bear. Each time he felt the urge to tell her of his feelings, he would remember his diagnosis, the ticking clock that reminded him of his mortality. He had endured enough pain and loss in his life. He would not allow Day to suffer the same. One day, as the sun began to set and the shadows stretched long across the village, he approached her with a forced smile. Day, he began, his voice steady but his heart aching. I need to go to Accra for a few days. There's someone I need to see. Day looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, her face etched with a mixture of surprise and concern. Accra? So far away? She asked, setting down her knife. Do you need money for transportation? He hesitated, but she reached into a small wooden box, pulling out a few crumpled bills and pressing them into his hand. Take this, she insisted. Whatever business you have, it must be important. And when you're done, come back to us. A pang of guilt pierced his heart as he accepted the money. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he was not going to see someone, but rather to confront the grim reality of his own health. But instead, he forced a smile and said, Thank you, Day. I promise I'll return soon. As he prepared to leave, young Nate came running up to him, his face clouded with worry. Mr. Dwamena, he said, tugging on his sleeve, promise you'll come back. Mama and I will miss you. Dwamena knelt down, placing a comforting hand on Nate's shoulder. I promise, he whispered, feeling the boy's words settle in his heart. Take care of your mother while I'm gone, okay? With a sad smile, he bid them farewell, feeling the weight of their love pressing on him as he walked down the dusty path, leaving behind the place he had come to think of as home. When he arrived in Accra, the bustling city seemed a world away from the peace of the village. He made his way to the hospital, his heart heavy as he prepared himself for the doctor's prognosis. He knew that his health was deteriorating, that the 5 years he had been given were ticking away, and he expected to hear nothing but grim news. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, greeted him with a familiar nod. After the usual pleasantries, they moved into the sterile room where tests were conducted. Dwamena waited in silence, the beeping machines and sterile surroundings, feeling like an unwelcome reminder of his mortality. Once the tests were complete, he sat across from the doctor, his heart pounding with a strange mix of dread and resignation. But the doctor's face held a look of bewilderment. He glanced over the charts, then back at Dwamena, his brows knitted in confusion. Mr. Dwamena, he began, his voice filled with surprise. I don't understand. Your results, they're remarkable. Dwamena blinked, unsure of what he had heard. Remarkable? He echoed, his voice barely a whisper. The doctor nodded, leaning forward as he scanned the reports. Your cancer, it's not progressing. In fact, it seems to be reversing. The tumors we tracked before are shrinking. He looked up, astonishment written on his face. This is highly unusual, almost miraculous. Are you on any new medications? Or is there someone taking care of you, perhaps using some herbal remedies or natural treatments? Dwamena's mind raced back to the village, to the herbal concoctions Day gave him each morning before they went to the farm, the warm meals, the laughter they shared by the fire, the peace he felt in their presence. He remembered the simple, earthy mixture she brewed, the roots and leaves she collected from the hillsides with care, each sip giving him strength he hadn't known he needed. Herbs, yes, he murmured, almost to himself. A kind woman in the village. She gives me herbs every day. She said it was for strength. The doctor's eyes lit up with interest. Whatever she's giving you, it's working. I've never seen anything like this before. He leaned back, a smile crossing his face. Mr. Dwamena, I don't know what's happening, but your body is responding to something powerful. If this continues, you may have far more time than we originally thought. Stunned, Juamena felt a rush of emotion flood through him, relief, disbelief, and overwhelming gratitude. He had come expecting the worst, ready to accept his fate, yet here he was, hearing words of hope he hadn't dared to dream of. As he left the hospital, his thoughts swirled. Could this truly be real? He felt a surge of joy, a deep gratitude for Dede and Nati, for the life they had given him, for the healing he hadn't known was even possible. His heart ached with a new longing, the one he had kept hidden, buried beneath his fears of death. In the final episode, we'll unveil the destiny of Mr. Juamena, Dede, and young Nate, diving deep into the strength of their bond and the transforming power of love and healing. Will Juamena's miraculous journey lead him closer to the woman who gave him hope, or will life chart a different course for them? Be ready for the heartwarming conclusion of this tale, a story filled with resilience, sacrifice, and the profound beauty of redemption. May you too encounter a love that heals, someone who turns your sorrows to joy, your pain to comfort, and stands by you unconditionally. May you find those who will carry your burdens, who love you deeply, not for gain, but simply for the warmth of your soul. Say Amen. So, stay tuned and remember to subscribe to Anansi Web of Tales for more stories that speak to the heart. And don't forget to let us know where you're watching from. We treasure our global family. See you in the final chapter of this unforgettable journey.